chemical basis for life than in all of the history of mankind prior to that. Did you know that? In the last 100 years or so, last 70 some odd actually, we have learned more about life at the chemical level than in all of the history of mankind prior to that. And you've lived through it. I have been privileged to be a student of this material in the midst of some of the most wonderful times in human history. Examples. 1953, Crick and Watson discovered the structure of DNA. All of you have heard of that. DNA has become a household word. Crick and Watson discovered the structure in 1953, for which they received the Nobel Prize in 1962. One of the greatest discoveries in the history of mankind. And since that time, it's been unfolding what we learn about DNA. Utterly amazing. You probably don't know, there was a famous scientist named Frederick Sanger who sequenced the first protein in 1951-52. Insulin was the first protein that was sequenced. And Frederick Sanger is the one who did that. And he got the Nobel Prize for that in 1958. There aren't many folks that win the Nobel Prize twice in chemistry. Frederick Sanger did. Because in 1977, he sequenced DNA for the first time. And he won the Nobel Prize for that in 1980. Incredible. Sequencing proteins and sequencing DNA, two of the greatest breakthroughs in the history of mankind. And we'll talk a lot more about that this morning. Lots of other things I could tell you from the chemical standpoint, but I want to talk a little bit about outer space because something tremendous happened in 1954. In fact, I have the date here. It was exactly October the 4th. That was yesterday. In 1957 is when this happened. Anybody know what happened on October the 4th, 1957? Who was alive then? Make me feel better and raise your hand.
Satellite?
Exactly. What satellite? What is it? Sputnik. Good job. Even at our age, we can still remember it. You young people, do you know what Sputnik is? It was the first object put in space in the history of mankind. And who put it up there? The Russians. Not good. Because we knew in our country the Russians were going to take over outer space and rule the world. And that certainly was a potential, wasn't it? So we set about to correct that. And here's some of the things that came out of that. Our government passed a bunch of laws and spent a bunch of money. So what else is new? To increase and improve science education. And I was a recipient of some of that largesse. Because among other things, they granted Harvard University 50 full ride scholarships to obtain a master's degree, and Harvard decided to use that money and give one scholarship to every state in the union. I happened to get the one for Florida. So I was privileged to attend Harvard University in 67, 68 on full scholarship thanks to our federal government in response to Sputnik. So I have lived this class, and I was privileged to be a part of, at Harvard, the Chem Study new curriculum for chemistry. And every science discipline had a new curriculum. There was BSCS biology, there was Chem Study chemistry, and there's PSSC physics. And all were developed by high school and college professors together to help us catch up with the Russians. It's an amazing time, class. Exciting times, but also times that turn in negative directions. Because the more we learned about the world and how living things function, the more people began to say, you don't need God anymore. And that became a big movement in the 1960s, 70s. And some of you may remember this article in Time magazine came out April the 8th, 1966. I was a freshman in in college, 1966. And the headline was, "Is God Dead?" Now you just sang a song that said, "Our God, He is what? Alive." Interestingly, that song was written by A.W. Dicus in in 1966. It was a direct response to the God is Dead movement, which became a big thing. So thank you, class, for singing out with vigor, our God, He is alive. In Him we live and we survive. Because the fact is, here we are 70 years later, and there's more evidence for God than there has ever been in the history of mankind. And what people thought was going to erase God from our memory has in fact given us greater evidence for His existence. But I can tell you as a college student in the 1960s, it was not that simple because it was scary. And I was personally influenced by many very intelligent people saying, you better get over belief in God. Because the more we learn, the less you need belief in God. You can understand, I hope, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. Because I went through it as a teenager and as a young man, trying to answer these problems that are presented. And listen, those folks are convincing, and they're intelligent, and they make arguments that you don't know how to answer. So let me make a couple of observations about that, and especially for our young folks. There will never be a time, young people, when you can answer all the questions. Never. There will always be things to challenge your faith. But what I want you to understand is someone has been through this for 50 years and come out on the other side a strong believer in God than ever. So don't you get scared of science. You dig deeply, and if you'll keep your mind open and clear, you'll come out a stronger believer. And I love for young people to get into the sciences because it opens up a whole new world for us. All right, so A.W. Dicus wrote this song. By the way, A.W. Dicus was the academic dean of the college where I became the dean later. I sat literally in his seat. But he was a physicist. And you use something every day of your life that he invented. You know, anybody know what that is? That'd be a good guess. No? Wasn't something quite as complex as that. It's the turn signal on your car. A.W. Dicus invented that. He was a highly respected physicist of his day, and not ashamed to declare openly, our God, He is alive, in the midst of a movement that said, no, our God is dead. In fact, many preachers in that time, these guys were quoted in this article, Altizer and Hamilton are theologians for the Methodist Church class. And here's what they were saying in their book, Radical Theology and the Death of God. We must realize that the death of God is an historical event, that God has died in our cosmos and in our history, and the dead God is the God of the historic Christian church, and beyond the church of Christendom at large. So these preachers are announcing that in our time, God has died. Is that beyond belief? That's what was happening in the 60s. And so not only science professors, but theologians were declaring the need for a God is no longer in existence. And of course, how in the world could God die? The only way is if we made him up in the first place. And that's exactly what was being taught. We created God. He didn't create us. And so we can, of course, kill him. And that was the common conception. And partly because we were learning so much more about how life works. And by the way, I intended for him to have verse 3 up there.
That's my fault.
That's his, I will blame that on him. Do you remember what verse 3 says? Secure is life from mortal mind. God holds the germ within his hand. Though men may search, what does it say next? They cannot find, for God alone does understand. I wanted that sung by you because I want you to believe that song. We had a professor of biology at Florida College where I was then serving as a chemistry and math professor. Our biology professor, whose name I will not speak of, refused to sing that verse. Are you listening to me? Our biology teacher would not sing verse 3 because he didn't believe it was true. He believed that in relatively learn how to produce life in a test tube. He really believed it because things were happening so rapidly. So I want you to feel the reality of this. You're a young person in college, and the movement is, you better get over believing in God, because you're going to be left behind in the dark ages. And I will tell you that even today, class, if I were to give this lecture in certain settings on college campuses, I would be laughed out of the room as somebody that belongs in the medieval times, comparable to people who believe the earth is flat and that everything revolves around the earth. Did you know there still is a geocentric society? You know what that means? It's a group of people who believe the earth sits in the middle of the universe and doesn't move, and everything else moves around us. That was the common conception in the Middle Ages. It was called the geocentric theory. The earth is the center. Did you know you can use the Bible to prove that? So you better be careful how you use the Bible sometimes. Because those expressions in the Bible that make it seem like the earth doesn't move and everything else goes around us, I believe are figurative, not literal. That they can be interpreted literally, and the Bible can be used against the notion that the earth revolves around the sun. Is there anybody in this room that thinks the earth sits still and the sun revolves around us? I don't think so. I think most of you, all of you, have become convinced that's not right. And science has upheld that. But what I'm telling you, class, is this movement was big. And it impacted lots of folks, including myself. I'm letting that sink in. Now there's a book out in 2021 called Is Atheism Dead? I love it. And it's in direct response to that article. Highly recommend this book to you. Eric Metaxas is not a scientist, but he's a well-read and careful student. And he does a good job with this. He's also a defender of God. So read this book. It'll be worth your while. And it responds to this whole God is dead movement. So let me show you a couple of things from that book. Since the Time article in 1966, roughly 5 things have arisen to challenge, and I will argue to overturn the secular consensus that formed in the wake of that article. He says it well. After that article, there was a wave of secularism. That means there's nothing but us. Material's all there is. There is no God. But he says there's roughly 5 things that have arisen to challenge that, and he believes overturn it. I do too. It's an exciting time, class, because you've lived through a time when God supposedly died, but I'm so happy to tell you he's alive again. And the evidence of science supports it. So here are the 5 things he lists. He said science is now teaching us there's a beginning. I can tell you that atheists of past ages thought matter was eternal. And they didn't have to explain where it came from because it's just always existed. And you know that an atheist will ask you, if you say God created matter, then where did God come from? And what will you say? God's eternal. And he doesn't have a beginning. And they will say, that's stupid, everybody has to have a beginning. Well, wouldn't you say the same thing to him about matter? Well, now we have good, strong evidence from science that matter has a beginning. Not the Bible, science. That's a good thing. And there's a whole section on that, and there's a whole raft of material I told you about last night that supports that. Second, fine-tuning. Did we talk about that last night? Mm-hmm. And what was the words we used? Everything has to be just right. Yes. And class, I went home last night and asked God's forgiveness for the incomplete, miserably, in effect, job I did. Because I didn't touch the hem of the garment for that argument. There's 1,000 more things we should I'm telling you, the evidence of fine-tuning is overwhelming. And in any court of law, if you were my jury, and I was trying to convince you that fine-tuning points to God, we could have spent 10 days with just listing all the evidence. And none of you would walk out here saying, isn't it interesting how that just happened coincidentally? How nature produced all this. No class, no normal human being could look at that evidence and say, no, that's somebody messed with this. This was design. And then thirdly, stupefying complexity. That's my subject today. I want you walking out of here stupefied. Okay? My intention is to stupefy you today. So that's what we're going to talk about here briefly. Then he said there's a whole a bunch of archaeological discoveries that have been found to support the text of the book. That's not my topic. It's fascinating. A lot of new archaeological discoveries that support the Bible. And then finally, we've learned what atheism is and what it produces. I don't have time this morning to go through a few pages here and talk to you about what he outlines. You have lived through the century of atheism, the 20th century. There's never been in the history of mankind more atheistic regimes. And what have they given us? They have killed millions of their own people, and especially religious people. They don't like us. And so, you want to learn what atheism has produced? You read this. It's factual information about the 20th century. Make you want to hit something. Because it's terrible. Look, folks, there are people in this country today that thinks we need to move towards socialist and communist systems. That's the last thing we want. Because their whole approach is God and religion are not only stupid and foolish, they are dangerous. You remember that Karl Marx said religion is the opiate of the people. He said it's the way foolish people dupe others into following them. And I can tell you in my study of false religions, there's a lot of truth to that. But folks, atheism and what it produces is way worse than anything religion's ever produced. It's negative. You don't want it. So he would argue those 5 things have arisen in the last 70 years that would overthrow the notion that God is dead. No, what ought to be dead is atheism. It's the last thing anybody needs. So, I think that's a powerfully good book, and I'm glad it came out in 2021. Put that on your list. And by the way, the bibliography is available now of all the books I referenced. It's back there on the back if you didn't get it. And the best ones have 4 stars by them. So you'll know which ones to get first. So, I'll start again, class. Scriptures teach that the study of nature should lead to a belief in God, do they not? Yes, and Romans 1:20 is my theme passage, which says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." That passage teaches that you can see God even though he's invisible. How do you do that? You examine things that are in the natural world that look like they're designed, and they point to someone with eternal power who does not belong to this world. Divinity is not part of this world. And it's the argument from design. So class, are you ready for a chemistry lecture this morning? That was weak. How about yes? All right, so here we go. This is our lecture on the great designer, evidence from the chemistry of living things. So I thought I'd start with one of the most famous scientists of our time, Francis Crick. I mentioned him earlier. Anybody remember? What did he get the Nobel Prize for?
Protein and DNA.
Yeah, but especially the structure of DNA. Francis Crick and James Watson are given credit for discovering the structure of DNA. So he's very famous. And he So he wrote a little book called Life Itself, Its Origin and Nature. If there's anybody you should listen to in science about where life came from, this is the man. So I'm going to read to you from page 72 of this little book and talk about life as we know it. Life as we know it on Earth appears as a synthesis of two macromolecular systems. And I just lost you, didn't I? Let me put that in plain English. Every living thing, from single cell like bacteria all the way up to you, has two kinds of molecules in it. And they're macro. What does macro mean? Big. Big. Macro means big. Micro means little. Macro means big. So there are two large molecular systems in every living thing. Nothing would be alive if it didn't have these. Okay? Is that better? Now let's go on. The proteins, because of their versatility and chemical reactivity, do all the work, but are unable to reproduce themselves in any simple way. Very important. Proteins do the work, but they can't reproduce it. You get that? That's on the quiz in the morning. Very important. So now he's going to introduce you to the types of proteins in your body. So here they are. First, they're structural materials. They're proteins that are assembled from amino acids. And they make up the shape and mobility of living things. Most everything that makes up your shape and allows you to move are made up of proteins. So that's one type of protein. Another, called the tools and machinery, that's the enzymes. But class, an enzyme is just a special case of a protein. It's a special form. It's still a protein. And the enzymes involved with metabolism, the growth and maintenance of living things. But that's proteins. So both of these groups right here are proteins. I want you to say that for me. Proteins. Say it.
Proteins.
That's weak. Let's say it again. Proteins.
Proteins.
Let me say it and then you say it. Proteins.
Proteins.
You're going to say that a lot this morning. In fact, I'm going to tell you right now, like I did last night, a whole bunch of the questions I'm going to ask you, the answer is proteins. Okay? So be ready. They're very important to every living thing. But the problem for an evolutionist, an atheist, is that every living thing has another type of molecule in it, not just protein. And they are called the blueprints, or the genes, or the nucleic acids. That's the DNA and the RNA that's in every living thing. Every single thing. It has those in it. And they are giant molecules. And they make for reproduction. Let me read you what Crick says in here. The nucleic acids seem tailor-made for reproduction, but can achieve rather little else compared to the more elaborate and better equipped proteins. RNA and DNA are the dumb blondes of the biomolecular world. Sorry, I didn't say that. So you blondes in this audience, I don't want to hear from you. He said that. They are fit mainly for reproduction with a little help from proteins, and I might add with a lot of help from proteins, but of little use for much really demanding work. Now that's not a nice thing to say about blondes, so forget it. But the fact is, they're good for reproduction, but not much else. But class, if you don't have reproduction, you don't have a living thing, right? So every living thing has in it lots of proteins and lots of DNA and RNA. You have to have both. So listen to what he says then. The problem of the origin of life, how did all this get started, would be a great deal easier to approach if there were only one family of macromolecules capable of doing both jobs. But life as we know it employs always two. from outer space sent the first living forms here on a spaceship. I'm serious. You get this book and read it for yourself. Starting with chapter 7 and through the end of this book, he's discussing how somebody sent the first life forms here on a spaceship. Is there one scintilla of evidence that somebody sent something here on a spaceship? There is not. Even though there's some kooks around who say there is. There's a whole chapter in here on what the spaceship might have been like. And what they might have sent here. Folks, it's a bunch of fairy tales written by the Nobel laureate Francis Crick. And you know what that says? We'll take anything over God. Anything. Fairy tales and all. No, there's a very strong opinion today that the first life forms probably had to come here from somewhere else because there hadn't been enough time in 4.5 supposed billion years to make life as complex as it is. Half of that book needs to be thrown in the garbage. And that's what we were dealing with in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it's only got worse in the minds of some. But here are the facts, class. Every living thing, from single cells all the way up to the most complex things there are on Earth, which is us, have the same kind of chemistry. Now, I want you to think about that a minute. Is it a foolish statement to say, all living things have the same chemistry, therefore they must have come from the same source? I think that's a very simple and amazing thing to say. And the evolutionist says that source is the tree of life. There's a single tree of life. Every living thing can trace its ancestry back to a single tree of life. Yeah, but they would call it a warm little pond where the first cells arose, from which everything else evolved by natural causes. I mean, that's their story. Well, folks, that is not a foolish notion. If we all have the same chemistry, one possible explanation is we all came from the same common source by natural causes. That is a possible explanation. Look, Darwin did not sweep the world with his notion of natural selection because it's totally stupid. No, it explains some things. And if you were to ask me, am I an evolutionist? I would say yes and no, like any good politician. Depends on what you mean. If you mean by evolution that there's been change over time, I absolutely believe that. And the evidence supports it. But do I believe that all living forms have come from a common ancestry by natural causes over billions of years? Absolutely not. And the evidence does not support that. Limited change, yes, I believe in that. So the way I like to picture this, class, and I want you to leave with this image in your mind. If you take all living things, it's a forest of things, not a single tree. You get what I'm saying? There's a tree here that's the kind of life forms we belong to. They're humans. And there's a lot of varieties of humans, aren't there? But you can't get beyond that. It'll vary within limits. Then there are other kinds of creatures that have their own tree, and they can vary within limits. A lot of variability. Have you ever thought about how many breeds of dogs there are? All the way from little Chihuahuas, all the way up to Great Danes. You can hold a little Chihuahua in your arms. I don't suggest you try to do that with a Great Dane. But we all believe that all those dogs came from some Heinz 57 kind of dog, don't we? And humans bred all those different types of dogs. Don't we all believe that? Well, that's a lot of change, class. And it happened by natural causes as people bred dogs selectively, didn't it? Darwin was a breeder of pigeons. And you can get all kinds of varieties of pigeons just by careful breeding. So he then said, why can't nature do the same thing? Over time, nature can select those breeds or those varieties which nature produces that are better able to survive. And And so that type of breed continues on, and over time, this little breed here may not even have relationships with that breed anymore. You see? So I believe in limited change. May I get biblical with you here? The Bible says in Genesis 1, God created kinds, doesn't it? And that those kinds bred or reproduced after their kind. So what's a kind? That's what you need to answer to. What's a kind? I know there's not going to be any change beyond kinds. The question is, what's a kind? Is it a species? That's a humanly defined construct. The word species never occurs in the Bible. So what is the biblical kind? That's the question. But I'll tell you what it does teach. Certain types will never become another type. The biblical kind will never transfer into something else. So I believe in limited change within kinds. I believe in unlimited change, that all living things have a common source. I hope you're with me on that. That's question 2 tomorrow. All right. So, here's what we're dealing with. The fact is, all living things have a common chemistry. What's another explanation for that? They have a common designer who wanted all living things to be able to interact and not only that, feed on each other. So don't you need a common chemistry for that? Yes, you do. Common designer is a very good explanation for that. But so is common relationships. They're both good. So you have to look deeper. So that's what we're going to do now. So here we go, class. Welcome to Biochemistry 101, first day of class. I hope you're wide awake. I hope you're wide awake. You see before you the 20 common amino acids. And I'll read a few of them for you. Glycine, alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, and so on, all the way down to methionine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, histidine. There's 20 of them. What you need to know, class, is that every protein in every living thing is made up of those 20. I don't care if it's a bacteria or if it's you. Your cells have proteins. Those proteins are made of this. Bacteria have proteins. Their proteins are made of these. We all have a common chemistry. And this is the commonality of proteins. All right? Now, I say every protein in every living thing is made of these. That's not completely true. There are a few that have some others. But this is good enough for government work. It's like 99.9%. So we're not even going to worry about the rest of those. It is a fact, class. You take a protein out of a bacteria, it'll have this stuff in it. Because they're made up of it. You take one out of you, and it'll have the same things. That's a fact. Interesting fact, isn't it? You think they knew that more than 100 years ago? No. All of this has been discovered the last 100 years. All right, let's look at something else here. Why are they called amino acids? Look at every one of these chemical structures. You see that NH3 right there? That one has one, that one, that one, that one. Can you see every one of these has an NH3 group? That makes it an amine. That's the word for a nitrogen group. So they're called amino acids because they have an amine group in them. Why are they called acids? If you look, every one of them has a COO group. That's a carbon attached to 2 oxygens. And it has normally on here an extra hydrogen. When you take that hydrogen off, a hydrogen ion, it leaves a negatively charged particle, and the hydrogen that you've released produces an acid. Therefore, they're called acids. Notice that every one of them has a COO. Can you see that? They all have a COO. COO. So they're amino acids. But do you also notice, class, that besides those 2 features, everything else is different? So glycine is the simplest amino acid. It has 2 carbons, 2 hydrogens here, 3 up there, a nitrogen, and then 2 oxygens. It's the simplest one. If you go to alanine, and you now have 3 carbon chain, you see that? And a nitrogen with hydrogens and oxygens. And if you go way down here, you see how much more complicated it gets? Look at tryptophan here. It's got an amine group, an acid group, and a 1, 2, 3, and then there's a 6-ring carbon, there's another C, another nitrogen, another H. It's complicated. But every one of them is an amino acid. Now class, if you were really in my biochemistry class, we would spend the next 6 weeks on this. I have 15 minutes. So you understand, this is pitiful. It's only the foundation for the chemistry of all living things. So tomorrow, class, I will expect you to name the 20 amino acids. Get your camera out. And ideally, their abbreviations. In most cases, the abbreviation is the first 3 letters, isn't it? Can you see that? Like with glycine, the abbreviation is GLY. That's easy. Alanine, it's ALA. Valine is VAL. Let's get down here. Tryptophan is TRY. Histidine, HIS. This one's a little more Sish, Aspin. But most of them are just the first 3 letters. So that's easy. So tomorrow morning, all 20 amino acids and their abbreviations. And I'm serious as a heart attack. If this were my class. If you would walk in here in the morning, you'd get your paper out and you'd name 20 amino acids. And their abbreviation. Why is that, class? It's the foundation for everything else we're going to do. Because that's what every protein is made of. This little guy. And may I just put in here, you better be eating your proteins and you're getting your amino acids. Because your body makes some of these. Some of them it doesn't make. So you have to feed them. So learn about it and give yourself a good chance to have all of what you need. Okay, you weren't ready. You need your amino acids because you got to build proteins. All right. Every protein is a combination of these 20, and it's very much like the alphabet. In English, there are 26 letters in our alphabet, and every word we produce in English is a combination of those 26 letters, isn't it? Even anti-disestablishmentarianism. That's a combination of the 26 letters of our alphabet. Good. The second great class of molecules is the DNA. It has a double helix with crossbars. That's what Crick and Watson discovered. Look over here. You see this band coming wrapping around here? And here's another one wrapping around the other way. See how they wrap around each other? And then it has crossbars. In this particular diagram, there's a green that always matches up with a blue, and the red matches up with the yellow. Can you see that? As you go down here. Green with blue, red, or yellow with red. Green, blue with green, so on. There are exactly 4 kinds of crossbars. That makes it capable of reproducing itself. It contains a language with 4 letters. A, T, G, and C. So what do you think my second question is tomorrow? Those 4 letters. A, T, G, and C. They are bases on the cross pieces for DNA. And they make up the language which directs everything in your body. There's a language. It's made up of 4 letters. Adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And along that double helix, as the strand unzips, it will expose one side, and that one side will have a sequence of those 4 letters. And that sequence, we've learned how to read. Amazing. And there it is. That's called the genetic code. Everybody's heard of that, haven't you? Did you know, class, that in a genetic code, in every cell of every living thing, there is a language, and every word in that language has 3 letters. Only 3 letters. And those 3 letters come from the 4 cross pieces, T, C, A, G. So what I have diagrammed here for you is if the first letter in the word is this one, and the second letter is this one, and the third letter is this one, you get every possible 3-letter word for the genetic code. So my job, class, and I'm looking at all of your eyes to make sure you're not getting sleepy. I think you're okay. I want to teach you how to read. We're going to read genetic code. So here we go. What if the first letter is T, the second letter is T, and the third letter is T? That's the word T, T, T. That is pronounced. You don't speak this language. It's an unspoken language. But there is a word T, T, T. Let's try another one. How about C-A-T? Well, you know that one. That's cat. But that's a specific word in genetic code. How about another one? How about A-T-G? That's attic. Right there. So you can make up every possible 3-letter word in gene code language. Because you only have 4 letters. And you have to use those 4, and you have to use them 3 at a time. And you can have repeats. Well, that's a math problem. If you can make 3-letter words, and you can use 4 different letters in each position, how many can you make? Well, it's 4 times 4 times 4. So do the math, class. 4 times 4 is? 16. Louder. 16, and 4 times 16 is? 64. There are exactly 64 words in this language, and they're all up there. I'm not going to ask you to memorize those words, but you need to learn how to read. Okay? That's how you make the words. Now, what do they mean? We'll go back up to the first one. What does TTT mean? It means PHE. You said, that's really helpful. It means key. Let's try another one. What does ATG mean? It means met. When you catch on, say something.
It's a protein.
Not quite. Close. When you get the idea. It's not the protein. It's what?
Amino acid.
The amino acid. But they make protein. Yeah. So, do you know this one, sir? What is PHE? Did you already memorize that?
Phenylalanine.
Good for you. Are you a guy that studies this?
Yeah.
Okay. That's cheating.
It's just right.
Yes. I'm glad you're here. PHE stands for phenylalanine, which is one of the 20 amino acids. So the code in the DNA, TTT, means amino acid phenylalanine. You with me? Kind of. What about ATG? You know that one? MET?
Which one?
MET, this one. I'm putting him on the spot. That is methionine. Methionine. It's another one of the amino acids. So what do you think, class? In that genetic code, you have a code for all 20 amino acids. Is that incredible? And teachers teach this stuff as if it's amazing that we discovered it. What's amazing, class, that it exists. Did you know that in every living thing, from bacteria to us, there is a common language that we all speak? And we know what it means. We've learned how to read. And not only that, that language is being used to do incredible things at remarkable speeds every microsecond. And people say, isn't it interesting how over millions of years this language evolved? a natural selection, acting upon natural variation, and it just produced a language. Class, there is zero evidence of anybody ever producing a language or of a language being produced apart from intelligence. There is no evidence. That's a fairy tale, but it's the common fairy tale of our day. If this were a court case, I would rest my case. Every living thing has a language in it that is being used and read at amazing speeds every single second. That, class, is sufficient evidence to say there was a God who made that. In my view. But that doesn't test the concern. We're not even close to beginning, to starting to learn something about it. Now, let's note some other things. Did you notice that there's some repeats up here? Did you see this one here? TTA, TTG, CTT, CTC, CTA, and CTG. Do you notice they're all LEU? You remember what that one is?
Leucine.
That's leucine. There are 6 codes for leucine. I call that a backup system. There's more than one code for leucine. There's more than one code for several of them. See, this is threonine. This is lysine. This is arginine. There's something else here. Do you see something up here that's not one of those 3-letter words? Look at it. Can you see it?
Term.
Right here. Can you see that? There's 3 terms. Anybody want to take a guess what that is?
In.
That means terminate. You do know what a terminator is, right? It's somebody that puts a stop to something. Those are codes that say stop! There's also a code up here for start. It's not listed, but it's the same ATG. ATG is a code for start. So, class, what you have before you is the genetic code that contains a code for every one of the 20 amino acids with repeats, a code for start, and a code for stop. And with that, class, our bodies can produce proteins at a remarkable rate. Not building. And they're doing it all the time. I repeat. I could say, I'll rest my case, Judge. Let the jury decide. This come about by natural causes, or did somebody create this? Any reasonable person. But we haven't even started. Because there's a whole lot more to the story, class. You see, the DNA contains the code up here, inside your nucleus. The code has to be transcribed. You have to copy it. And then the copy has to be matured and migrated outside the nucleus, picked up by 2 ducks hugging each other. Doesn't that look like 2 ducks hugging each other? They don't look like that, class. That's a picture. That is a ribosome. And it picks up the code that comes out of this DNA on messenger RNA, and it reads it like tape through a tape player, and out the bottom comes a sequence of amino acids in a row. A string of amino acids, class, makes a protein. Good, only that was weak. A string of amino acids makes a protein. Thank you. Be enthusiastic about this. Every protein is a string of amino acids. This is how they're produced in your cell. And in your cell, in every second, you produce millions of these. That's why you get tired just sitting there listening to me. And it's worse for me. Because your body is building millions of proteins every second. So eat your proteins. But here's the process by which it does it. In class, we knew most all of this by the 1980s. That doesn't solve anything. It just moves it out somewhere. Besides, there's zero evidence for it. No, class, this was designed. And now we need to talk a little more in detail about this, so let me move forward and blow that up a little bit. Here's the transcription phase. The DNA has to be unzipped, or you can't copy it. Guess what it takes, class, to unzip DNA?
Protein. Just right.
Today it's protein. But I'll tell you this, it has to be just the right protein. Not just any protein will do. It has to be a specific protein. In fact, a specific group of proteins. So look, class, you can't unzip DNA without proteins, so of course you can't make copies of anything unless you have proteins. Not only that, you have to have a blob of proteins, as you're going to see in a minute. What do you think it takes to zip it back up?
Proteins.
Yeah. Does your zipper ever get stuck? Zippers get stuck sometimes. Did you know DNA is an extremely complex thing that's all wrapped around itself? It can get tangled up if you're not careful. There are specific proteins that keep it from getting tangled up. So we've said protein twice now, right, about building protein. What are we doing here, class? We're trying to build one protein. And so far we've listed groups of proteins already needed to build one protein. Stay with me. All right, once the copy is made, it's called messenger RNA. And by the way, you also have to build ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA over here. We're not even talking about that. That's another whole 10 days of lectures. So, okay, that's why I'm going to go home and pray again tonight. Because I'm not talking about any of this. That's another whole subject. We're just talking about this one. All right, the messenger RNA copies the information, then it has to be matured. You see these little white areas? In the 1980s, we began to discover that not all of that messenger RNA is copied. Some of it is snipped out. They're called introns. And then it is matured, and then the mature messenger RNA migrates out. You know what people started saying? The evolutionists who are atheists? They're saying, if you think God did this, why would God make something where you got to copy it and then you have to edit it before you can use it? Why not just make what you need right off the bat and then go ahead and use it? That's stupid. I can read you science books where they call this stupid, foolish, nothing any God would do. And my answer to them is, you better be careful what you call stupid. How about saying humbly, I don't know what's going on here, but it doesn't look normal? That's a much better answer than to say that's stupid design, because that's what was argued. And out of that came a whole thesis that there is junk DNA. That was part of it. And between the 1980s and 2010, there were books written about junk DNA and how most of the DNA, 95% of it is a bunch of junk. And you believers in God better get over it because God doesn't make junk. Well, I agree God doesn't make junk, but you better stop what you're saying and think a little bit. Because there's now a book out called The Junk of Myth DNA. No, The Myth of Junk DNA. Because there's a whole lot of stuff going on there we knew nothing about 20 years ago. For example, this intron business right here, you know what we learned, class, in the last 10 years? Those introns are full of RNAs that are used for all kinds of things that we knew nothing about 20 years ago. And the snipping out of this thing and maturing it allows you to make, class, listen to me, that same stretch of information can produce sometimes as many as 1,000 different proteins. Because you can reorganize it. If you snip this out and this out and this out and just put these together the way they are, that's one. But what if you snip this out and you put this piece over here, this piece over there, that piece over there? Can you see how you can reorganize that thing? And what we learned is there are spliceosomes in every cell that reorganize that messenger RNA and produce different proteins from the same stretch of information. learned, class, is what they thought was stupid is in fact an amazing improvement on anything we knew. Because the same piece of information can produce thousands of different proteins packed together. It makes you want to throw something and say, praise the Lord. So look, class, if you come up with something that's bothering you and you don't know how to answer it, you just wait a while. You give science about 20 years, and you'll be amazed. And the answer you didn't know, here's what you ought to say. Well, no, I don't believe God makes junk. And that doesn't look reasonable, that there would be introns, but maybe there's something we don't know. There's a much better answer. And it's been proved over and over again. And this is a classic illustration. All right, so you've got to copy it. What does it take, class, to make it unzip?
Protein.
What does it take to zip back together?
Protein.
What does it take to edit it?
Protein.
Specialized proteins. They're called editosomes and spliceosomes. Listen, I wish we had 6 classes on spliceosomes. Because they are complicated proteins with RNA mixtures. They do all kinds of amazing things. And then you got to migrate outside the nucleus. What do you think it takes to migrate, class?
Protein.
That was weak.
Protein.
See that hole right there? That's a hole in the nuclear membrane. Do you think a nuclear membrane is going to let just anything go through that hole? No. What do you think guards the hole, class?
Protein.
Exactly. And when this messenger RNA comes up to that hole and says, I'm here, I want to go through, the protein says, well, welcome in. And it opens up and allows the messenger RNA through, and it closes back up again. And on the other side, the same thing happens. It's like a border patrol. And it is a what, class?
Protein.
Another protein. Now you're outside the nucleus. Let's move forward here. Here comes the messenger RNA outside the nuclear opening there, and it's picked up by these 2 ducts. That's the ribosomes. And then each, see these 3-letter words here? G-U-G. Anybody remember what that is? Gug. I don't either, so don't feel bad. But that 3-letter word stands for a particular amino acid. And then CGC stands for another amino acid. And then AGT, say, is another one. So this thing is reading those 3-letter codes. When it reads this one, it says, go get me a methionine or a isoleucine. And here comes the transfer RNA carrying that specific amino acid into the ribosome so they can add it to the string of amino acids which make a
Protein.
Good. But did you know you have to have 20 specific transfer RNAs, one for each amino acid? That's 20 specific transfer RNAs. Did you know, class, that each one of those transfer RNAs also has to have a specific
Protein.
So that's 20 more proteins. So you should say protein 20 times. No, I'm not going to ask you. But that's 20 more specific proteins. And that's all required to get this particular amino acid to come up in here and join up to build this protein. All of that's happening at the same time to make this thing grow. Let's see what else I want to say here. That's it. Now what I want to show you, class, to make this come alive, is a video. And this video has been produced by biomedical animator Drew Berry, who works at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research in Melbourne, Australia. The guy's a genius animator. What he does is try to make things come alive at the microscopic level. Because you can't see it directly. So he makes pictures. So, with the expert help of my IT man, and may I take just a moment and thank Sam? Because I've sent stuff to him ahead of time, so he's been working on this for how long?
Yeah, probably not as much as I should.
More than he should. We're going to see his work here in a minute. But I can't do this without the IT guy. This lecture would be useless without all the visuals, right? So I'm counting on him. And he's done his work, I'm telling you. And now we're going to really test it now. Because we're going to see this video next. So let's go ahead, because this guy's amazing. I'm going to say to you, here's another go to Drew Berry's website and look at the animations he's made. They're incredible. There's all kinds of it. We're going to use this particular one in just a second. And his job is to stop and start when I tell him.
Not to mess it up.
And don't mess it up. No pressure. Just you're fired if you didn't know. No, it's all volunteer help people. But I need him to start and stop when I need him to. Okay? There is a moderator in the background, but we're not using it. I'm the moderator. Because the moderators of all of these things are evolutionists. And they're not good. I mean, they do a decent job, but it's evolutionary from beginning to end. These guys are true believers, and they're just as wrong as they can be. So I'm the moderator. So he's helping me. Thank you. So here we go, class. Here you see before you on the screen the DNA strand, and this is a glob of, what do you think?
Protein.
Excellent. And notice that the animator has colored them different colors. You see? And that's only to show you they're different proteins. Those proteins are not those colors. Do you understand this? That's just a picture. But it helps you understand. That is a glob of proteins that is riding along this strand inside every cell in the nucleus. Okay? Proteins needed to transcribe DNA. All right, now we're going to watch as this thing begins. Go. This is the start of a gene for a bone strength protein inside the nucleus. Stop right there. You see it says vitamin D up here. There's that little blob. That's vitamin D. And what we're going to watch is that vitamin D activates this protein, which starts the whole process. Get your vitamin D, class. You probably get out in the sun here more than we do. We have so much humidity. We stay in the air conditioning most of the time. But you need your vitamin D because it activates protein building. So let's watch now. Here comes the vitamin D up to this protein, and boom, he turns green. Stop. He does not turn green, class. Drew Berry likes red and green because red means stop, green means go. So before it was stopped, when the vitamin D adds on, it means go. That's why he does that. All right? So we're ready to activate this protein glob. Now let's look at what happens. Go. So here comes another. What do you think? Glob of? Protein. Stop right there. Now you have a glob. I've lost count. I think there's 8 different proteins here. Each protein in that blob has a specific task. You listening? And if we had time, class, I'd tell you what each one of them was. We don't have time. All right, I've noticed something here. I know I've been talking a long time, but I can't have you sleeping. So everybody stand up. I'd be asleep too. I'm not blaming you. And if I were in a college class, I'd be making you do some calisthenics. So instead, we're just going to stomp our feet. You know, if you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. I want you to shake yourself because what you're doing is activating a lot of those proteins. And it helps you stay awake. So thank you for cooperating. And thank you for nobody leaving. It's okay. Be seated. Thank you. I just didn't want to lose you right here. I need you with me. All right, let's go. Here's the protein glob, and let's watch what happens. Stop right there. This is ribonuclease, class. Anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme. And if you were listening to me earlier, an enzyme is a special case of a
Protein.
Exactly. So that's the special blob of protein that rides along the DNA and helps to unzip it, make the copies, and proceed on. The yellow thing coming out the top is the messenger RNA that's being produced. Okay? Let's go. So we're now riding along here. Here comes the blob of ribonuclease. Stop right there just a second. And what that's pointing out is the DNA is going this direction. You see, that's this purplish thing. This is the glob of protein, and this is the messenger RNA coming out the top. And down inside here is where the transcription of the genetic code is taking place. Down inside that glob, because the DNA is down inside there, and we're going to go down there and look at what's going on. All right, here we go. We're going to now magnify this blob right here. provide the raw material which makes this RNA copy. You got to have raw material. So all of that's floating around in your cytoplasm. That's why you need a healthy diet to provide the material to help you build proteins. You have thousands upon thousands of proteins being built every day. You need a healthy diet. All right, so that's going on. Let's watch now. We're going to blow this up a little bit and look down inside here. So stop right there. You can see now we're down inside, and you see how the DNA is unzipped right here? It takes what, class, to unzip it? Proteins. This RNA polymerase blob has in it a protein that helps that unzip. Go ahead. Now we're going to look a little closer. Stop right there. Can you see the code here? G, T, A, G, C, and so on. On this side, this is the DNA. Here we're building the RNA one letter at a time. One letter at a time. So if there's an A over here, there's going to be a U over there. If there's a G over here, there's going to be a C over there. If there's a C over here, there's going to be a G over there. It's a mirror image. The exact reflection of what's on the code of the DNA. And it's being built one at a time. So let's go on a little further. Looks pretty amazing. Stop. All right, so here, that one is being added, you see, right there. The C, so this is a G here. And it's being added one piece at a time and connecting up to the others. Now, one of the problems with these videos that I've experienced through the years is they do not give you a realistic picture of how rapidly this happens. This is what Drew Berry's trying to accomplish. So you watch. Don't you miss this. Let's go. This is how fast it happens. This is real time. Stop right there just a second. You see this slide? Did you know that the average protein is 10,000 units long? 10,000 amino acids. They range from 200 to 10,000. Some are smaller than that. Some are 30,000. That means you've got to copy 3 times 30,000 of those letters. And it does it in microseconds. Almost no time. All right, once it's copied, then it's going to be released. And this doesn't show that very much, but you're going to see it in just a second. Stop. It's coming out the hole there. Do you see that? This is the nuclear membrane. Here is the messenger RNA. It is migrated through here. What does it take, class, to get through that hole?
Protein.
Correct. Now you're outside in the cytoplasm. Keep going. And instead of being picked up by 2 ducks hugging each other, this is what it looks like more realistically. These are the ribosomes that are coming up here and clamping down on it. And stop right there just a second. So here is the code. Can you see there's 3 letters, 3 letters, 3 letters, 3 letters, 3 letters? And each one of those 3 letters stands for an amino acid. And it's being read here through the ribosome one at a time. So when it reads those 3 letters, it says, go get me an isoleucine. And so out in the cytoplasm, it calls on a transfer RNA with its combined protein, and it brings it in here and connects it up. Then it reads the next one and says, bring me a valine. And the next transfer RNA comes in and brings the valine. Then it says, bring me a leucine, and it does that. One after the other. Can you see, class, that you're taking the code copied off the DNA, and you're now reading it and allowing it to build a protein. That's what's happening. Let's go. I'm going to try to show you a little better here. Down inside, here's where all the action. This is the transfer RNAs coming in and out. And then we're going to look close at the transfer RNAs. Let's let this go for a little bit. Can you see that each one's got a little red blob on the end of it? See that little red blob? That's the amino acid. Stop. Good job. This is transfer RNA. That's the amino acid. There's a specific one for each transfer RNA. There's 20 of them. And down at this end of the RNA is the code that matches the code from the DNA. And up at that end is the amino acid. So let's watch. He's going to show you the different ones. There's a different one, different one, different one, different one, 20 of those. And they come in here to match the code. Now we're going to look down inside. Stop right there. Here's the transfer amino acid. Down here is the code that's being read and matched down here. Up here is the amino acid that's being added to this strand of amino acids. And a strand of amino acids is a
Protein.
Right. You're building a hemoglobin right here. You see the reddish color? Hemoglobin has lots of iron in it, so it's reddish. So it's building up here at the top. But notice it's building one amino acid at a time. Go. Transfer RNA, amino acid up here, transfer RNA, amino acid. You know the problem with this, class? Way too slow. So he's going to try to speed it up for you a little bit, give you some idea of how rapidly this happens. Way too slow. Move it! Now at the top comes the protein. As all of this is happening down below. Stop just a second. I'm letting this go here, class, because I want you to just look at this. This is the protein coming out as a strand of amino acids. But class, a protein is more than just a string of amino acids. It's a string of amino acids that folds up upon itself in a specific secondary structure. And when it's finished with that, it goes into another body called the Golgi body, where it is formed into another tertiary shape, and if all those do not happen, the protein doesn't work. Guess what it takes, class, in the Golgi body to help form that tertiary substance?
Protein.
More proteins. Go. Way too slow. Way too slow. Once that protein comes up, stop there just a second. How does it know when to stop, class? Where it pose, it says terminate, and it stops reading and lets it go. That's the protein. There's also a code that says start. All built in. So there it is. In its three-dimensional shape, but it's not finished. Still has to go to the Golgi body, requiring more proteins. Class. In the course of that process I've just described to you, to build one protein requires at least 50 different specific proteins, or you don't get a protein. And here's the catcher. Don't miss this. Every one of those 50 are built the same way. Are you getting it? Let's take the very first one, like one ribonuclease that rides along and unzips the DNA. How did you get the first ribonuclease?
Eternal.
It's a problem, isn't it? It's eternal.
You need it to work before to work.
Exactly. It's the old chicken and the egg problem, isn't it? The proteins and the DNA both have to be present, functioning in amazingly remarkable ways, or you don't get the first protein built. And there's 50 of them required to build one. And all of them have to be built the same way. Folks, that looks to me like a plan. It looks to me like somebody with amazing power and intelligence designed this process that functions. Did you see how fast that goes? Your body can build a protein with 30,000 amino acid units in microseconds. And somebody calls me foolish for believing in God. No, I'll tell you who's foolish. It's somebody who can make up a story they think explains that without God. The chemistry of building proteins in every living cell is sufficient to proclaim there must be a great designer. Now, class, I've already spoken for an hour and 25 minutes, so I'm stopping. But do you think I'm finished? But I'm not going to wear you out. describes the bacterial flagellum. You know what a flagellum is? It's a little tail. It's a filament. And it's on the back of the little bacteria, and it flips around like this and allows it to swim.
Does it help cure?
Does
it help cure?
Well,
If it's a
I was going to study with you E. coli. You ever heard of E. coli? E. coli will kill you. It's a bacteria that will kill you. What you don't know is there are strains of E. coli that you must have to live, because they live in your intestines all the time. You have thousands of them swimming in your gut right now. Sorry, that's a little gross, but that's true. You have thousands of E. coli swimming in you now, and they swim by that little flagellum. And if you looked at your thumb sideways, look at your thumbnail sideways, you could line up 1,000 E. coli side by side across the width of your thumb. That's how tiny they are. And they have little flagella that make them swim. And what I was going to show you on that video, which we don't have time for, was that it has a motor that drives the flagella. And that motor is better than anything any human ever built. By far! And it's in every little bacteria of E. coli. Somebody's messing with things. This did not happen by natural causes. And everywhere you look, class, I'm telling you, the overwhelming evidence is this was designed. It's everywhere. Everywhere. So can we kind of get to the end of this quickly? How do we do this?
Just keep clicking.
Just click it on. I'll click through real quick. You can see there's a lot to talk about here. There's the video. Which is more reasonable, class? Molecular machines were produced by the blind forces of physics through numerous successive slight modifications produced by random variation acted upon by natural selection. That's the common scientific explanation. It's a bunch of gobbledygook. Or is it more reasonable to believe these were designed by a supremely intelligent designer? There's no comparison to those explanations. They would say this is no explanation because it's not scientific. Class, science can point to a designer. It cannot tell you much about that designer except it must be super intelligent. You need to go to the other book to learn about that designer. But science can point you to a designer. There are multiple protein processes. Each protein is complex, suited for its function. Each machine is highly sophisticated, intricate, dynamic, and elegant. And the thing you need to know is these machines are spontaneously self-assembled in the cell. Your body builds them by itself. So not only do you have to explain how did you get a Ford motor, how did you get the factory that builds it inside yourself? And there are thousands of them in every living cell. No wonder Anthony Flew, 80 years was an atheist, debated many of us creationists and belittled us for our beliefs. At 80 years old, he wrote this book. There is no, I mean a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. Here's how. It has become inordinately difficult even to begin to think about constructing a naturalistic theory of the evolution of that first reproducing organism. The enormous complexity by which the results were achieved looks to me like the work of intelligence. It now seems to me the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design, says former atheist Anthony Flew. And his colleagues crucify him, not literally, for daring to say such a thing. And I say, thank God for somebody brave as that, at 80 years old, to change his mind about something that's fundamental. I hope you walk out of here today stupefied with the amazing complexity that we've just touched the hem of the garment. And folks, when I get finished with our whole biochemistry class, we have not given honor to God properly. Because we don't know duty squad about the amazing